Welcome to another episode of Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement Podcast, where certified financial planner Lauren Sherman shares thoughts on having a healthy mind, body, and spirit, an abundance of wealth inside portfolios and out, and lessons learned from clients and mentors over the years.
Welcome in to another Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement. I'm your host, Lauren Sherman, and today we are going to talk about how to invalidate your will. Of course, similar to a few episodes I've recorded in the past, you won't see this pop up in anyone's Google search history, as no one has the intention of invalidating their own will. One episode in particular that comes to mind that fits this bill was titled, How to Disinherit Your Grandkids. To our retired crowd that is listening right now, for many of you, unintentionally disinheriting your grandkids would feel like the ultimate financial mistake. On top of that, you would no longer be around to correct it, which probably makes some of you cringe just hearing that. I've talked with a lot of you about this, and many of you jokingly say that you like your grandkids more than your own kids, or maybe I should say half-jokingly. Grandkids have the advantage since you're not fully responsible for them, and they typically haven't had enough years to challenge or frustrate you too much. Looking back, the episode about disinheriting your grandkids was only my 9th episode, and we've had a lot of new listeners come along since then. So that's a good one that's related to today's topic that I will link in the show notes if you'd like to revisit that one or listen in for the first time. With all of that said about disinheriting your grandkids, invalidating your will can be just as damaging, or perhaps even more so. And this happens more often than you might think. Invalidating your will can cause some pretty big estate issues when passing assets to the next generation. So today, we will revisit a newsletter article that I wrote a while back and cover 7 ways to invalidate your will. These days, you can search for just about anything online. I'm looking back to when I first wrote this article, and at that time, my wife and I just added a new garden to our backyard. Every time we weren't sure about something, I'd find myself doing a quick how-to search on my phone just to make sure we didn't mess anything up. But as any passionate gardener has learned, you can Google information, but you cannot Google wisdom. It's with that thought today that we're going to take a quick look at 7 different ways things can go sideways with your last will and testament. My hope is that sharing not just what we should do, but also what we need to avoid, that this will provide some context and ultimately wisdom for our listeners as you make these decisions for yourself. Before jumping into the 7 different ways you can invalidate your will, let's quickly touch on what a will is and why it's important. A will is a legal document that allows you to have some say after you are gone. It allows you to decide what happens to assets and belongings even though you're no longer there to verbalize your wishes. This is important because it can help avoid disputes amongst the remaining family members and ensure your wishes are carried out. Our firm often helps retirees set up their legal planning, whether in the form of a will, trust, or estate planning documents. Other times, we are reviewing what retirees already have in place, and the following 7 mistakes come up often. Let's jump in with mistake number 1. The first way your will could be invalid if it's what's called a holographic will. This means it is handwritten and without any witnesses. This is less and less an issue in today's age of technology, but it's still worth mentioning. And while some states do consider a holographic will as a valid legal document, you may move to another state in retirement, or state laws could change. In short, this is just too easy of a mistake to avoid, so it's not worth opening your will up for dispute just because you didn't take the proper time to set it up. Mistake number 2. Not only should your will be in print and witnessed, but it also needs to have the proper witnesses too. This often means having 2 to 3 adults aged 18 or older, and ideally does not include any of the beneficiaries of the will. And of course, the beneficiaries being those who receive benefits from your will. Additionally, it's not ideal to have the executor be your witness either, or at least not your only witness. The executor being the person who is responsible for carrying out your will's instructions. In short, your witness should not have any skin in the game, as they say. Mistake number 3. The third way you could invalidate your will involves not destroying previous wills that came before your most recent version. This might sound silly at first, but as years or even decades pass, it's not uncommon for one will to be in a safety deposit box, while another is in the home safe, while a third could be in a file cabinet. If everything gets executed based upon an older will, it's challenging, if not impossible, to unwind this and correct the mistake, particularly if assets have already been dispersed and perhaps even spent. Ironically, this one can be challenging not only for those who are unorganized, but also for those who do keep things pretty well organized. If you're listening right now and would consider yourself to be the organizer of the family, perhaps you can relate to this. It can be tough to get rid of official legal documents, even if they are outdated. The organizer type mindset thinks, well, I'm going to hold on to this just in case it's ever needed in the future. But if your executor isn't quite as meticulous as you, they may mistake an older version that you've filed away as your current will. If you just can't get over the idea of shredding outdated documents, then I would at a minimum be sure to clearly void anything outdated that you hold on to. You can also note on the document what it has been replaced with. For example, perhaps you've had a couple more grandchildren and wish to update your will. You could write void on your outdated will along with a note, perhaps that it's been replaced with a will from September of 2022, located in lockbox number 125 at Hills Bank. Of course, it's easiest to keep power of attorney, healthcare directives, your will, trust, and so on all together in one location, and ideally backed up digitally so it's easily accessible to your executor. Mistake number 4. So far, we've covered that your will needs to be in print, have the correct witnesses, and to only keep your most recent will to avoid confusion. Let's move on to the fourth and most common reason that wills are challenged and sometimes invalidated: the mental competence of the person making the will. Even when wills are created with the best of intentions, sometimes retirees simply wait too long and their mind isn't what it once was. Often what prompts a family to create a will is when they see a parent or loved one struggling with their health and they're forced to think about their eventual passing. In the majority of states, one must meet a basic competency to create a will, which includes having an understanding of the property and assets they own, who their relatives and beneficiaries are, as well as what their will says and what it means. Some ways to avoid this mistake include working with an attorney, having the proper witnesses and notary, as well as having a physician's report verifying your competency. It can even be helpful to have a video showing you work through the process to verify you were of the right mind and not coerced. This is particularly important if your instructions are a little outside of the ordinary. For example, if you have 5 children, but only want to pass assets to 3 of the children, a handful of grandchildren, and a couple of charities, this will is more likely to be challenged than most, since everything is not evenly distributed. In these cases, a physician's report and even video evidence can help ensure your estate is dispersed how you intended. Mistake number 5. We also want to make sure that we're following any state-specific provisions and that our language is clear to avoid reasons for the will to be contested. While universally each will should be relatively similar in design, some states may have their own requirements and/or preferred language. If you relocate to another state or have any major life changes, these are both good indicators that your will is due for a review. Much like a financial plan, your will is not something you should do once and never revisit. Further, to ensure the language in your will is clear, you will want to reference that it is in fact your last will and testament, meaning there should not be any assumptions as to the purpose of the document. You will also want to clearly list who gets what and list the name of an executor who will handle the process of distributing the property and assets once that time comes. Let's move into the home stretch with the 6th way your will may be invalidated. This one is similar to mistake number 4, in which a will can be invalidated due to mental incapacity when the will was created. For our sixth mistake, your will can also be invalidated if the court finds that fraud or undue influence were involved in the creation of a will. A couple of more common situations where this may arise includes a family member who is also a caretaker petitioning for a larger inheritance than they are expected to get, or even a non-family caretaker forcing their way into the will. Sadly, it is most frequently those who are closest to someone creating that will who are found guilty of fraud of some kind. Another example of this involves a family member getting amendments to a will. They can get these signed by pretending that it is a different legal document or something unimportant. And finally, our seventh and final way to potentially invalidate your will: not updating your beneficiaries in other legal documents to reflect the wishes of your will. Insurance contracts, for example, supersede the instructions of your will. Put another way, if the beneficiary instructions of a life insurance policy do not match the instructions of your will, your beneficiary instructions hold more power, and that is what will be followed. This can be frustrating for the couple who spent hours setting up their will just how they'd like, only to see assets go to an ex-spouse, perhaps a child with a spending problem, or even end up back in the estate if the beneficiary is no longer living. If assets end up back in the estate, this might not sound like a big deal, but it could mean, or probably even likely means, a lengthy and costly probate process, and in the case of life insurance, could trigger a tax-free asset to become taxable to the estate. The bottom line here is not to think your work is complete just because you created or updated your will. Make sure the rest of your assets are congruent with your wishes in order to avoid future headaches. Once again, I've talked about this last mistake in more detail in a past episode, so if you'd like to revisit that one, you can find it in the show notes, which includes its own PDF visual. Of course, the end goal is to take these worries off your plate and put them in the hands of a professional. My aim with these episodes is always to provide as much value to retirees as I can, and part of that is providing solutions rather than simply bringing up potential problems. With that in mind, if you would like our team to conduct a no-obligation review of your estate planning documents, feel free to use the link in our show notes titled Legal Documents Review. This has actually been one of our most popular reviews that we've offered, as people often see this as something they are doing for their family more so than for themselves. Just a bite-sized episode for today, but if you have questions or ideas that you'd like to see covered in future episodes, feel free to connect with me via email at shermanl@integrityguidance.com. And that's also listed in the show notes as well. So that does it for today. Once again, feel free to take advantage of that complimentary legal document review. And as always, check out healthywealthywiseretirement.com for all of my past episodes. We will be back in 2 weeks to chat more.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, we would love if you took a quick moment to leave an honest review. Of course, we're shooting for 5 stars, but if you have suggestions to improve the show, we would love to hear from you too. Just click on the podcast name, Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement Podcast, and scroll down to ratings and review. Thanks again for your support, as this helps us reach a wider audience and help even more retirees just like you. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a specific tax, legal, or investment advice. Lauren Sherman is a certified financial planner and co-owner of Integrity Wealth Management, an investment advisor serving retirees in search of their own healthy, wealthy, and wise retirement lifestyle.